Good day, and thank you for joining us for another amazing show and another terrific guest. Green energy resources are absolutely central to the future of our planet. And our guest today and his crew are working on a new green energy solution that will help our planet and also potentially support quantum computing. Welcome to the Tech and Space Leaders Show, where we learn lessons from leaders of the next frontier. I am your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, Chris Salvino. He is the CEO and Chief Engineer at Lunar Helium 3 Mining. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. I appreciate your time.
It's so great to have you here today. Why don't we start by having you give a little bit of background on yourself and Lunar Helium 3 Mining?
Sure. Well, my background's a little bit eclectic. I'm a part time physician, but for now, ignore that. So, my background really, when it comes to this, is science. And I have a background in planetary geology, aerospace engineering, flight test engineering, and probably the most important recent background is in engineering mining, which is the mining engineering on how to extract minerals such as gold or coal. And that has a lot to do with mining on the moon. And our company called Lunar Helium 3 Mining, or LH3M, its singular and sole purpose is to build the technology to go to the moon to extract something called helium 3. So that's the only reason we exist.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so what actually motivated you to focus on the mining of helium-3 on the moon?
That's a great question. I get to ask that question a lot from friends and relatives. And I've always had an interest in space. I've always done something with aerospace. I've had a dual career pathway since college. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was getting a degree in planetary geology, and something called helium 3 came up. None of the professors knew much about it. They weren't talking about it. It was kind of a speculative little isotope. And I'm like, there's something about this that makes me want to explore more. It's on the surface of the moon. How can it be utilized on Earth? And from there, to understand it further, I went off and got degrees in planetary or engineering mining and aerospace engineering. So, engineering mining and aerospace engineering at the exact same time to try to understand okay, if it's on the moon, we know what geologically it's there. What type of equipment do you have to build from an engineering point of view? And how would you mine this? So that's where all this sort of came from was this question that happened at Arizona State University 6 or 7 years ago.
Oh my gosh. And helium-3 isn't something that is available on Earth, then it's only available on the moon, or I guess other places in space potentially?
Well, to set the stage, helium 3 is not what you stick inside your party balloons. That's so the audience should be aware about that. We're not talking about party balloon helium, but helium 3 is an isotope of helium. It's a special, like, cousin to helium, and it comes from the sun. So the primary place it comes from is the sun. The sun shoots it out constantly. It goes in the solar wind. It travels through space, and on Earth, it gets caught in our atmosphere, so it doesn't make it to the ground. And on the moon, there's no atmosphere, so it's been baked into the ground for billions of years.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's really
Now I
fascinating.
just lost you on my audio.
Oh
I'm
no,
going
really?
to sorry about that.
Oh, okay. Are we good still?
Can you, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, we're switching audio to a different version. So just like going to the moon, we're calling it audio.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so what have been the major technical hurdles regarding actually mining helium-3 on the moon?
Well, we should probably answer the one question prior. If it, how do we even have it if it comes from the sun? How do we even know about it?
Right.
So on Earth, we don't get it from the sun. It's actually a bizarre byproduct of nuclear weapons production from the Cold War. So a substance came out of the nuclear bombs. It's not going to leak and go into your garage, but it's a substance that comes from the production of nuclear bombs. It takes about 12 years to get it. So eventually, from the production of nuclear bombs, you have this thing called helium-3 as a byproduct, a bizarre byproduct. At one point, the U.S. had about 20 kilos of this,
Huh.
and right now we might have between 1 and 5 kilograms. So there's a small supply in the United States. There's probably a small supply in Russia and China, and there's no ideal way to build it at scale or make it at scale. So if you want it, you're not going to get it on Earth. And if you want it, you're going to have to go to the moon because it's been baked into the ground for billions of years. So
Wow.
that's the question about extraction, or we're,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Go,
I don't
please
think I
go
have my
into
headset's back on.
that.
So we'll go back and forth. So on the moon, it's interesting. We know there's an estimated maybe 1 million tons. There's a lot of it. It might be 100,000 tons, it might be 2 million. The data to come up with that number comes from Apollo, back when the Apollo astronauts were on the moon. So there's a lot of it up there. The question is, how do you get it out of the ground? And if you try to go to the moon and use like Earth based mining techniques, like you mine a copper mine in the United States, it will fail for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons is because the dirt on the moon, called the regolith, is very, 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 underlined very 5 times, very abrasive. It will destroy equipment. So you have to go to the moon and you've got to come up with a novel way of extracting it with the least amount of moving parts. So if you're going to go there to get it, it's there for the taking. It's kind of our storage facility. It's there to take it out of the ground and bring back to Earth, but you have to go there and use a lunar technique to extract it.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so where are you actually today in terms of the development and getting to the moon and actually being able to extract helium-3?
So we spent 2 years sort of underground, and the last year above the ground. We've come out to discuss where we are. So we have a massive patent portfolio of issued and pending patents, all on the process of detection through making the gas come out of the ground, which includes helium-3, and separating the gases and collecting it. So it's from detection to the point where you have helium-3 in your hand, and you can bring that back to Earth. So that's we spent 3 years on that. We are now beginning a Series A capital raise, which just started last week to advance the technology in a stepwise fashion. We want to go into a lab, complete some of the science, and then do another capital raise to put hardware on the surface of the moon. So we're probably about 5 years out from having hardware on the moon that would demonstrate that we could get, for example, 1 gram of helium-3. Showing our technology, extract 1 gram of helium-3, and if we can bring that simple 1 gram back to Earth, that will start the beginning of the commercial race to the moon to extract helium-3.
Wow. Okay, so why do we want to do this in the first place? I know that you've talked about truly green energy, so let's get into that angle a little bit.
So let's discuss two things. Let's discuss that one, and then if we have time, it might be why the heck is anybody going back to the moon, and who's going back to the moon? It's not just the U.S.
Right.
So if we can bring back helium-3, and again, the only place you're going to get it is on the moon. We think there's four major use cases. Right now, we need helium-3 for simple things like it could be used in an MRI machine to detect some lung diseases. No one's using it because there's no supply. We could also use it now to detect nuclear bombs at borders. Ironically, you need it for that. We don't have enough, so those machines to detect it cannot use helium-3. So there's some existing use cases, but the big use cases would revolve around quantum computing. And quantum computing is a computer that is going to be beyond fast. It's going to be exceptionally fast, much faster than the computers we have now. And ironically, you need helium-3. Now, you need helium-3 to cool the computers down. You need helium-3 to disconnect to cool the computers down to nearly absolute zero. So the question you might ask is, who cares about quantum computing? It is so fast that it could solve equations, potentially solve some cancers, produce some drugs. It could do a world of things we cannot do now. But from a governmental point of view, the interesting thing is any government that owns a quantum computer might be able to develop offensive and defensive weapons that another country cannot. So quantum computers have a major strategic importance with the US federal government and our European allies versus China, for example. So
Huh.
one end user is a quantum computer, and you need helium-3 to cool it. The other end user is fusion, and I want to break that down into two components. So nuclear fusion, which is beginning to be, not beginning, it's been developed for a while. It's getting farther and farther along. When it's out there and ready to be commercialized, should replace the burning of fossil fuels, which is good. It should replace nuclear fission reactors, which is the type of nuclear we have now, because those can explode like what happened in Russia with Chernobyl. So fusion is the next energy coming up, but the fuel the fusion companies are using in development is called tritium. Tritium is not green energy. So tritium, when it's placed into a nuclear fusion reactor, the beauty of it is that it cannot explode, and that's where the advantage stops. Because if you use tritium, first off, you have to mine it out of the ground, and it gets a little complicated. You have to mine something called lithium with a real mine, and we're running out of the supply. Then you have to convert it with a nuclear reaction into tritium. And when you finally stick tritium into a nuclear fusion reaction, there are waste products to store. So nuclear fusion with tritium is a step up that it cannot explode, but it is not green energy. If you had helium-3 and you used that as the fuel, the beauty about that is the helium-3 would come from the moon, so it won't have to be mined out of Earth, and it has no waste products. So if you put helium-3 into a fusion reactor that has no waste products, it comes from the moon, now you're talking about scalable across the whole globe, scalable green energy. Can't explode, no waste products. It's the holy grail of fuel. But fusion requires helium-3. Now here's another use case that's just beginning to be discussed. Nuclear fusion with helium-3 is significantly safer than nuclear fusion with tritium. In fact, if you use tritium, the stuff that comes out of it during the reaction is very, very dangerous, and you have to have insulation, something like 6, 8, 9, 10 feet thick. You need a lot of it. If you used helium-3, what comes out of that reaction is much, much, much safer. So your insulation could be as small as 3 centimeters or maybe 1 inch.
Oh my gosh.
So, so now you could create. Let me see. Am I hearing you now? Can you hear me
Hello.
now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you sorry about that. Now you could create a nuclear fusion reactor that is small, potentially the size of a football. What does that mean? Now we potentially have nuclear fusion that's decentralized. Instead of having your traditional power plants, like one in Chicago, one in Arizona, you could potentially supply a village or a small town with its own energy source, or as one fusion company thinks, even power your car. So all this controversy about data centers
Yeah.
and the energy that's coming from data centers, like a lot of people don't want them in their backyard. The energy part, if we had nuclear fusion that is decentralized, if they use helium-3, you could power a data center and not have to take the electricity from the grid. So we have quantum computing, central fusion for large power plants in the future, and theoretically decentralized fusion so you can power your car, your house in the future. It's a whole new world coming up. All of it goes back to the moon. You got to go to the moon to get this bizarre thing called helium-3.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay, so how are you going to be able to commercialize this, especially given, I mean, obviously there's going to be some pretty high costs to go mine it off the moon, bring it back to Earth, and then are there additional things that need to happen once the helium-3 arrives back to Earth in order to make it usable?
Well, the beauty about it is we are adopting some Earth based equipment for the moon. We are not taking up Earth based mining equipment. So the technology already exists. And once you bring it back to Earth, you bring back helium 3 in liquid form. Sort of like what they have in hospitals with oxygen.
Mhm.
Hospitals, people don't see it. They when they get their oxygen placed on their face, it normally comes from liquid oxygen that's sitting behind the scenes because it can be compressed down. So instead of running around with gaseous oxygen in big tanks, in hospitals they have liquid oxygen in very small containers. Same thing would apply. You'd bring back helium-3 from the moon. It would come back in liquid form, and everybody knows industries knows how to take liquid or gaseous helium-3 and use it at that point. So there'll be no technology required once it comes back to Earth on how to use it.
Wow. Okay. What are the major next steps that are required to move from concept to operational readiness?
It's a great question. It kind of goes back to a bigger picture is most of your audience probably knows this, but many people in the United States don't. Why are we even going back to the moon? So America wants to, with our European partners, wants to land on the surface of the moon with something called Artemis. And Artemis is this is my personal opinion. The value proposition for Artemis to the American public is iffy. Why do Americans care if people land on the moon and pick up some rocks and do some research? It's very, very expensive. When Apollo, when the Apollo astronauts in the 60s and 70s went to the moon, it was when the economic time was way better than we are now. The value back then, the proposition was we were in a race with Russia. It was communism versus capitalism. Everybody knew that. The interesting thing is there was supposed to have been 20 missions to the moon, 20 Apollo landings. And after six, the American public got used to it. I would hate to use the word bored, but it was no longer novel. And so the American public got bored, and guess what happened? Congress, which listens to the American public, cut the funding, so the last 14 missions were canceled. So when it comes to going back to the moon with a public initiative like Artemis, we have to be very careful that the American public would actually support something like that. I'm going to say that they probably won't. But that raises a question, well, why else would we go to the moon? And the only economic reason to be on the moon, the only resource, like, and I could say this with conviction, the only reason to go to the moon is to extract helium-3. It's the only one that has enough economic value to overcome the expense. There's gold on the moon, great. There's copper, there's rare earth elements. We know that's there, but it's too expensive to go to extract them. So helium-3 on the moon potentially could be the main reason to go to the moon, and not just with like one rover. Eventually, there could be a family of rovers, like 100 rovers, big commercial rovers, like a farm,
Yeah.
extracting helium-3 and bringing it back to power fusion for green energy and for quantum computing.
Wow, amazing. What partnerships and collaborations are important to advancing this mission?
A phenomenally important question. There's no one company that can do this. So our focus is on the mining techniques and the detection techniques that would take place underneath what I would call our mining rover. And from there, that's our focus. We're like if you can imagine a football team, we're like the captain. However, we need a football coach. So we need large space companies that would partner with us to provide the rockets, the landers, the chassis for the rover, even commercial astronauts that would actually go up and fix things. So all that infrastructure would be around this. And the best and fun analogy is if you look at the 1840s California gold rush. The gold rush was about the gold. But around that, the whole industry popped up. You had to have food. People had to supply the food, the equipment, Some people had to provide the transportation and the housing at the towns along the way. So the gold is the same thing as helium 3. That's our job. We're like the miners, but we need all the other companies to provide all the other infrastructure. So it's going to be a concise team approach. And we believe if you look into the future, what happened to this satellite industry is probably what's going to happen on the moon. And what happened to the satellite industry was in the 1960s and 70s, the US government the US government paid for large satellites are very expensive, very bulky, very big. And over 50 years we went from that and now we have assembly mines producing massive amounts of satellites. It's all private industry. We think the same thing is going to happen to the surface of the moon. The vision would be the primary reason to be on the surface is to extract helium 3 in a large, big new industry.
Wow. Okay. And you actually have a broader long-term mission in mind, and we mentioned quantum computing a couple of times in this conversation. What is your longer-term vision for LH3M?
The long term vision is for us is to be the primary movers underneath the rover and to have all these other companies supporting us to bring back helium 3 to the surface of Earth, that is. And
Yeah.
actually, here's another one. The focus has been on the usage of helium 3 on Earth. But if you're on the surface of the moon mining this, the moon has 2 weeks of daylight and 2 weeks of nighttime. If you want to mine at nighttime, it's not going to be with batteries. We're going to need some type of nuclear power. And NASA's proposed nuclear fission, like a regular nuclear power plant on the moon. We think that's old school. And we mean this by no disrespect. We could put a nuclear fusion plant, a small, decentralized nuclear fusion plant, and maybe even power all of our rovers because the fuel's sitting right there.
Yeah. Wow,
Yeah.
fascinating. So I think that kind of leads to that broader cislunar economy over the next decade. What does that look like?
It's a phenomenally important question, and it fundamentally comes down to what is the value proposition for the cis-lunar economy. There is a lot of companies getting a lot of federal money to build things. They want to build landers, they want to build rovers, they want to build uh, parking lots, they want to build habitats. The whole question is why? They're private companies, but they're being paid for mainly by the federal government to do this. And ultimately, who's going to pay for this? Is this a governmental public initiative, or is this eventually going to be a private initiative? If it's going to get paid for by the private economy, there has to be value proposition for investors to invest. And so, like we mentioned earlier, there's no way you would go to the moon to harvest gold. We know there's some water up there, but it's not going to be used to be brought back to Earth. So ultimately, why would investors invest in anything that has to do with the moon? It ultimately comes down to who's paying for it. So if it's public paying for it to have research on the moon, great. But I would argue that the U.S. public and the European partners public is not going to put up with the expense of looking for rocks on the moon in the long term, maybe one or two missions. But in the American public, many of them can't pay their electric bill. They're worried about gas prices. They may be very concerned that we're spending. We've already spent $110 billion on the Lunar program. They may be very concerned we're spending money on that as opposed to what's important. Comes back to helium 3. Helium 3 is, we're so focused, sorry, we have tunnel vision. But when we look outside our tunnel vision, this makes a lot of sense for investors because there's trillions of dollars to be made. It makes sense for the general public because we can bring back something to make green energy to save the planet. It makes sense if you're a US government or European government and you want to have quantum computers. So it speaks to a lot of different people, whereas just going to the moon to look for research and water would be great, but it's costing so much money, I don't know we can afford it.
Right, right, right. What a fascinating topic, and I'm really excited about your mission. If someone wanted to learn more about LH3M, what should they do?
They can simply come to our website, lh3m.com. There's dozens of videos up there about different things that have to do with extraction, some articles we've written. There's a whole host of information up there, and they can sign up for our newsletter and follow our progress, which, by the way, is part of our mandate. We want the American public and the European public and the rest of the world to follow along with this new value proposition. It's not governmental. Why go to the moon if it's about Helium 3? We're trying to get the story out. We want people to be aware.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you so much for making time to be here today. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to watching as you continue to develop this amazing mission.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for having me, and appreciate your audience listening.
Absolutely. And I do want to take a moment to thank GuideForce for hosting these sessions. To learn more about GuideForce, you can visit guideforce.com. And we'll see you next time on the Tech and Space Leaders Show.